so welcome to Lecture 4 on Jainism. So Jainism is another tradition that comes out of India. It is indigenous or native to India. However, there's enough about it that's sort of uniform that separates it from other Hindu traditions. So it is sort of categorized as a separate tradition other than Hinduism, although Jainism and Hinduism are both native to India. So again, it arose out of the subcontinent of India. Today, there are approximately 4.5 million adherents, which is pretty small. I mean, that's a large number of people, but to put it in perspective, I think there's over 1 billion people living on the Indian subcontinent now. So it's a minority position, although it's a substantial minority in terms of numbers. What you'll see as we go through this PowerPoint is that Jains tend to be strongly ascetic. And you might remember asceticism is renouncing worldly pleasure. It's the opposite of sensuality. So fasting, experiencing pain, abstaining from sex, like all of that those are all ascetic practices. Although it is a small tradition, it was extremely influential. It exerted enormous influence on both Hinduism and Buddhism. And after we do Jainism, the next lecture will be on Buddhism. Mahavira. So its major teacher, the major Jain prophet or teacher is Mahavira, also pronounced Mahavir, and that translates as the great hero. He was a contemporary of the Buddha and died in approximately 527 before the Common Era. Similar to the Buddha, which you haven't encountered yet, Mahavira was born a prince and renounced his position and wealth. After 12 years of ascetic suffering and meditation, he achieved liberation and perfection. And then after that, he spent 30 years spreading his teachings, and his followers came from all castes, as he did not acknowledge the caste system. Quote, the Jain teachings are not thought to have originated with Mahavira, however, he is considered the last of 24 Tirthankaras of the current cosmic cycle. So Jains believe Mahavira is the last great prophet out of a chain of prophets, and that chain of prophets is known as the Tirthankaras. So more about the Tirthankaras and some ascetic orders within Jainism. So the word Tirthankara means ford maker, they create a crossing or ford across the river of rebirth to the further shore of liberation. So it's similar to Hinduism, where Jainism believes yourself or your soul is stuck in a cycle of rebirth, and the goal is to be liberated out of that cycle. The universe is thought to be without beginning or end, quote, eternally it passes through long cycles of progress and decline. So similar to Hinduism and similar to a lot of Eastern thought, you don't need to posit some sort of deity or creator to explain why something exists rather than nothing. For in Eastern thought, it's considered a more elegant move to just say, instead of positing this eternal creator, why don't we just say all of this is eternal? It might always be in flux, but the flux itself is eternal. Tirthankaras help humans maintain their happiness, longevity, and virtue in periods of decline. So they're sent to sort of save humanity from corruption and pollution and decline in these long cycles of progress and decline. Quote, the extreme antiquity of Jainism as a non-Vedic indigenous Indian religion is well documented. Ancient Hindu and Buddhist scriptures refer to Jainism as an existing tradition that began long before Mahavira. So there is outside support for the tradition's claim that Mahavira is the last prophet of a chain of prophets that were recognized by Jains, and therefore that places Jainism as an extremely ancient tradition. I mean, Mahavira died in the 6th century before the Common Era, So centuries and centuries before that, perhaps even thousands of years before that, there were prophets acknowledged by people that would later be known as Jains. So there was a schism in the followers among Jainism, a schism or split. So you have the Digambaras, who are Jains that left the main group and did not accept changes that relaxed a nudity requirement of monks and the composition of a 45-book canon. So traditionally, Jain men are monks, and part of their ascetic practice is not wearing clothing, which sort of exposes the body to the elements and pain, and it's sort of an ascetic practice. They do not consider themselves nude, however, but rather clothed by the environment. The only other possessions of a Digambara monk are a gourd and a broom. So the gourd is to be able to collect water and drink out of the gourd or hold food. It's sort of just like a drinking and eating vessel. And the broom, interestingly enough, is to sweep gently before they walk, where they're stepping, so as to move small living organisms out of the way from being crushed by their steps. So it's an extreme act of compassion towards other living organisms. However, the Digambaras hold very patriarchal views and believe women can only gain liberation if reborn as men. So you have the Digambaras, they were a group, they left the main group. The main group became known after this schism as the Shvetambaras, and they stayed near Mahavira's original location and wear simple white clothes. They do ordain nuns, however, nuns are of a lower status than monks, but they also think women in general may achieve liberation as women, not as women that must be later reborn as men. And there is, interestingly enough, sort of these rogue, ascetic, independent Jain nuns. So there's Jain women that believe that they can attain liberation outside of sort of the patriarchal, institutionalized Jainism, and they have developed communities where they pursue that liberation. The ethical pillars. So first of all, you have the concept of the jiva. A jiva is an individual's higher consciousness or soul, which can save itself by discovering its own perfect, unchanging nature. So it's very similar, almost identical to the concept of the Atman within Hinduism. Like Hinduism, explicitly, they believe in the cycle of rebirth and death, known as samsara. So you're stuck in samsara, this wheel of life and death, and you keep getting reborn. Therefore, the jiva has past lives, and unless you attain liberation, will have future lives as well. One must purify one's ethical life until nothing remains but the purity of the jiva. This is kind of like karma yoga in Hinduism, which was the path of attaining liberation through good deeds. So there's a similar sort of understanding, an overlap between karma yoga and Hinduism and the way that Jains attain perfection or the realization of the jiva's nature, divine nature. So in its true state, the jiva is omniscient, which means all-knowing, shining, potent or powerful, peaceful, self-contained, and blissful. So it sounds a lot like divinity. So again, like in Hinduism, the realization of the self as divinity is sort of the goal of liberation that will get you out of the cycle of samsara. One who has attained this state is called a jina, a winner over the passions. And this is where the term Jain is derived. The Tirthankaras were jinas, or enlightened people that were liberated, who helped others find their way by teaching inspiring spiritual principles. So they're these benevolent beings that, although they attain liberation, stick around to help other human beings attain liberation as well. So the concept of karma in Jainism is very different than the concept in Hinduism. So the universe operates by the power of nature according to natural principles. There are like demigods or gods and demons who are subject to the same problematic passions, and humans are above them because only humans can attain liberation. So these sort of semi-divine beings are forever trapped here, and are really fickle and prone to suffering like humans. Humans must clear away karmic accumulations on the soul. So literally, karma for Jains is subtle matter. It's minute particles that we accumulate as we think and act. So karma is like pollution, literal, physical, material pollution that you can't perceive with the senses but is physically there, and it accumulates on your soul or jiva, and you want to purify your jiva of your karmic accumulation. So karma is a negative thing. It's not this neutral law of good things happen to you if you're good, bad things happen to you if you're bad, the way it is in Hinduism. Rather, it's karma is bad, minute particles. Kavala is what moksha is to Hinduism. Kavala is to Jainism. It is the highest state of perfection. It is liberation. And again, a Jina is a one who has attained Kavala, and they have done so by realizing the perfect nature of their jiva, which is possible by eliminating karmic accumulation on the jiva. So the next 3 slides will each attend to the 3 principles within Jainism that are posited to avoid accumulating karma. And there'll be a slide for each. The first will be nonviolence or ahimsa, non-attachment or parigraha, and non-absolutism or anakantwad. So ahimsa. Ahimsa is a principle of extreme compassion and nonviolence. So there are minute living beings everywhere, concentrated throughout the physical universe. Humans have no special right to supremacy. All things deserve to live, not to life, to live and evolve as they can. And to kill any living being has negative karmic effects. So even in breathing, you're inhaling and killing minute organisms. So you want to minimize this as much as possible. This is really an uphill battle, as you can imagine, attaining Kavala. And therefore, they are strict vegetarians. All Jains are strict vegetarians, even ones that aren't monks or nuns and are lay people. They're all vegetarian. Aparigraha. This is non-attachment to things and people. And we have a quote from the text to help us with this. Contemporary Jains point out that their principle of limiting consumption offers a way out of the global poverty, hunger, and environmental degradation that will result from unequal grasping of resources by the wealthy. So it's sort of the opposite of greed. And Jains are very critical of the consumerist culture that the West has sort of exported globally, that has come with globalization, and instead sort of espouse this idea that you should be serenely detached from material wealth and what happens to you, and sort of take what comes with gratitude and serenity. Anekantwad. This translates as manifold aspects, and it refers to the fact that truth has many ways, or manifold aspects, or many ways of approaching it. It translates well as non-absolutism. So we'll use a Jain metaphor involving an elephant and blind people. So say there is an elephant, and this elephant represents ultimate reality or truth. All the major world religions, according to Jains, are blind people trying to figure out what the elephant is. And some only have access to the trunk. One might have only access to a leg. One might be touching the tail. One might be just touching the body. none of them are going to have a complete concept of the elephant or of absolute reality. And in this way, this is sort of a metaphor that would advocate pluralism, that it takes all of the traditions together and the celebration of what's different about them, how they perceive truth differently, that should be celebrated. But all of them together provide a complex and rich human understanding of ultimate reality and truth. So Jains are all pluralists to some extent. They're not heavily trying to convert people. They're more relaxed about that, and they're extremely tolerant and respectful of other traditions. Some spiritual practices. So an ascetic path is practiced in its fullest by monks and nuns, but there are 12 more limited vows for Jain lay people on page 127 of your textbook. Some examples of these 12 vows are the vow of nonviolence, which is interpreted to different degrees based on whether you're a lay person or a monk, the vow of truthfulness, the vow of not taking anything that has not been given, the vow of renouncing sexual activity outside of marriage, and the vow of limiting one's possessions. In Jain temples, so Jains have temples where they may worship, or not really worship, but sort of reflect. In the temples, the Tirthankaras that are represented there in statues all look identical because they all are the one jiva, or like in Hinduism, the one Atman. We all share an Atman. In Jainism, all the Tirthankaras are this one jiva, and they're all worshipped with reverence, not supplication. So it's not really like worshiping, like I adore you, I'm beneath you, but just I revere you, I want to attain what you've attained through my own striving, the way you attained it through your own striving. Interestingly enough, the ultimate spiritual practice in Jainism is fasting unto death at the end of life. And this is done very carefully. It's not like a suicide. It's if you are clearly on your way out of existence, fasting because consumption kills minute living organisms. So it's a way of totally purifying yourself at the end of life. Festivals and pilgrimages. So some of their holy days overlap with other Hindu holy days, but Jains practice them with more ascetic practices or festivities on holy days. Diwali is an ascetic fast to celebrate the liberation of Mahavira. And it's tough to pronounce, Paryushan Mahaparva is the most important Jain festival. It is the annual festival of atonement, where you make up for your sins or the karma or suffering you're causing in the world. So world Jainism. So there has been emigration of Jains to different parts of the world, as well as Jain teachers left to help spread their teachings, but not in a really like aggressive way. Jain scriptures consider as Jains all those who practice Jain principles. So if you practice nonviolence and you don't have a really exclusivist approach to spirituality and whatnot, you're sort of like considered a Jain by Jains. Like you don't have to convert. What's more important than identifying as a Jain is practicing nonviolence and non-absolutism. The traditional Jain qualities of individual asceticism and renunciation seem to be giving way to a focus on environmentalism, animal rights, vegan diet, nonviolence, and interfaith activities. So those are all sort of projects that contemporary Jains are undergoing. They're very involved with animal rights, environmentalism, as well as pacifist projects and reaching out to other faiths in dialogue. So some questions. How might someone put the principle of ahimsa into practice in your own society, and how would it affect the person's behavior? So this is like addressing the scale. Ahimsa, again, is nonviolence. The scale of how could you be more nonviolent in your life. Maybe you wouldn't believe that it would be necessary to brush every area you're about to step with a broom gently to remove living organisms that might be crushed. That'd be very extreme. But maybe consider the amount of meat that you consume and whether that amount is necessary or even detrimental to your health, and how might, you kind of move away from that, or I don't know. There's a lot of ways of interpreting this. This is a pretty subjective question. Explain how the Jain understanding of karma differs from that of Hinduism. So in Hinduism, karma refers to the law of good things happening to good people and bad things happening to bad people. So when you do something bad, there will be bad karmic consequences. When you do something good, there will be good karmic consequences. So it refers to this sort of karmic law that's functioning in the universe. Whereas for Jains, the word karma refers to literal physical matter, minute particles that accumulate on the soul or the jiva that prevent it from attaining liberation and realizing its own divinity. So karma for Jains is matter, it's material, and it's polluting material, so it's always negative. And in Hinduism, it neutrally refers to the law of bad things happening to bad people and good things happening to good people. Of course, that the consequences of karmic consequences play out over lifetimes in Hinduism. Imagine that Jains have decided to send missionaries to the United States. What message do you think they would offer to Americans about their lifestyles, and how do you think Americans might respond? I think that'd be another really subjective question for you to answer that you can have fun with in your posts on this lecture. So it would be cool to see some of you post about that question and see what you come up with. So that is it for lecture in PowerPoint 4. The next chapter will be on Buddhism.